Yeah, I think Greatswords is such a consistent deck, whether you're on blue coin or on red coin, and it's a deck that I think a lot of players are just happy not to play against, because a lot of the times it is fairly, easy wins in comparison to some of the other matchups.
If you're targeting it like House of Cards is, you obviously don't care because your game plan is in the format there is in the tournament right now. It's to maybe lose 2 games against Dagon Deathwish and Full Test, and then win 3 in a row against the Kraken Crate. So in this case, he didn't ban it. He banned Brewer instead, which is a deck that could steal a win here and there. It's a pretty strong deck shoot in general. But yeah, LpHanachan has no real answer to Greatswords, and he decides to ban it instead, which is a very viable strategy as well.
That is true, but I think HANAChan, he's going to have a bit of a tough time against these control-orientated lists when you're running Dagon and Kraken Crate yourself, but actually opting not to open with that, instead opening with the Temerian Full Test list.
And this is not Greatsword, so like you said, this Ethne list is very control heavy. It's going to have a decent amount of points, decent amount of synergy, but it doesn't have the answers it needs in terms of engines, because Full Test doesn't have engines. It has great synergies and the infantrymen that can create a lot of tempo, and in general just really good cards that add up a lot of points, but no clear archetype engine that you can shut down with damage like Thunders and Yorvith, for example. Yeah,
and control doesn't work the same way as it does against Hensel, where you're trying to kind of deny those Hensels. But one thing that's worth mentioning is with House of Cards list, it's a control list, but it's not a Scorch list. There's no Shiru, there's no Scorch. It's Ethne, but it's Ethne that's very reliant on removing small targets rather than removing big targets.
Exactly. You have Archers, you have Thunder, you have Sage and Mercs to bring those Thunders out and repeat their effects, but like you said, no Scorch, so no big unit effect. I think it's clear that the real target here was Greatswords and ships as well. At 8-9 points, it's the perfect target for Thunder, and it really makes Yorvith as well and Muzzle. It makes just great use of that. In this case, not too much to deal with. You can't really Thunder too many units here.
Yeah, we see the early spy coming out of House of Cards, trying to reverse that coin flip and kind of put the ball into HANAChan's core in terms of how he wants to play this. If he chooses to pass, he goes down 1 card, and I think he's quite happy to just play and thin his deck at this point when you're running those commandos.
And you can't really pass with so many, cards that you don't want to draw into the mulligan. You have to thin these out. So round 1, HANAChan has to play into this. He played Full Test, which is very slow tempo, and House of Cards punished that in some way by playing a Spy, which it didn't get him. He wasn't 20 points behind. He was only a few points behind because Full Test is only 5 points.
I think though this control, it will help House of Cards in some ways, because he can shut down all of those crew units, other than I guess the Ronvid, unless he weakens the Ronvid and maybe utilizes the Muzzle. He can shut down all of the blue stripes, and blue stripes have crewmen, and what that means is they give extra damage to your battering rams, they give extra points to your towers, and while it might not seem like a large number of points, across a lot of machines, that does add up.
And we see a Muzzle here being hovered by House of Cards. He's thinking about really messing up this strategy. Like you said, he takes away the crewman, he takes away a decent 12-point swing for a gold. It's not ideal, but it's not bad either.
Yeah, I think it's a fair Muzzle. It's a 12-point play versus. I mean, I guess you could have Saged and then used the Ulzers, and that's also a 12-point play. I guess it depends on whether you feel like you're going to get better muzzle targets. He maybe could have waited 1 more turn, but by allowing it to survive a turn and get maybe 1 point bigger, he's also giving HANAChan access to crewmen, and I think he just doesn't want to do that.
He's also blocking the Reaver Scout. The Reaver Scout would have, it would have been great to play Reaver Scout now. You get rid of that card, thin what you have to thin it, and really just get your game going, but with no target for the Reaver Scout right now. He has to wait for the Siege Tower, the battering ram to hit the floor, and they may get zapped immediately. So Reaver Scout might be in a bit of a pickle. He might be just lonely the whole game.
That is true. 100% people, we used to talk about, dead Hensels, blocking the Hensel, 3-point Hensel, but 3-point Hensel, 2-point Reaver Scout. It's basically the same thing. I mean, admittedly, House of Cards isn't certain that it's in his hand, but I feel like he's fairly certain it's in his deck.
And we see a Commando in HANAChan's hand, not ideal. But we see HANAChan with a commanding play there saying, look, this is a bronze card, but this bronze card is worth 24 points. What are you going to do about it? Yeah,
we do see the extra commando there because HANAChan is running Vernon Roche. Vernon Roche is a card which deals 7 damage to an opponent, but also puts an extra commando into your deck. So you get a +1, which is why there's 4. If that's confusing to new players, that's just because of HANAChan's Roche.
We're going to see, I think, a pretty clear mulligan here from HANAChan. Does not want that commando. Needs to bring it out with, well, with the card he just got, with Vernon Roche. It's a perfect combo right there.
Yeah, Vernon Roche himself, he is a Temerian. I mean, that's not surprising. Temeria, that is what matters in this situation. And because he's a Temerian, he's getting boosted for all of these Blue Stripe Scouts in the same way that we saw the Commandos getting boosted and the Temerian Infantry.
And HANAChan playing a very standard Full Test list has been popular in the past few weeks. a lot of players have brought the same exact full test list, actually the same bronze or silver and gold package, and pretty much the same bronze package, except for a trebuchet, which was played last series, which was kind of the odd one out. So there is no spy. There's no spy here for HanaChan. He has to either commit to this round and hope he can stay ahead, or he has to pass now and go into a pretty long round against a deck that doesn't really have engine. House of Cards isn't really playing a deck that thrives in a long round, so I guess it's not going to punish him too much if he wants to play it safe and pass now.
I think what is really interesting, though, looking at these two players and also the decks that they did bring, HanaChan opted not to bring Nilfgaard. And HanaChan, he used to be, known for playing Nilfgaard. I think he was one of the people who was pioneering alchemy back in the day. So it's very interesting that he's actually opted to go for a monsters list and a Northern Realms list when these are widely seen amongst the Gwent community as the weakest two factions.
You might have just thought there would be too many counters. Obviously, you can go into the counter of the counter and think what your opponents might be bringing and trying to play around that to win just the ban game and the targeting game right away. So we're going to have to ask him later, but House of Cards goes for the Sage here, gets that out of his hand, not going to zap itself, thankfully. And then we're just going to go into a round 3 where none of these decks really have too good of a long round. It's not really what they thrive in. But I think HanaChan definitely had the better short round with cards like Dijkstra. So in some way, I think this benefits House of Cards, even though he does not have Last Day.
That is true. Although HanaChan, I think he will be quite happy that he's managed to thin what he needs. So even though we're going into a long round, which means we haven't played that many cards or had that many opportunities to thin, HanaChan, we saw him committing the Temerian Infantry, which is often a card that people hold for a shorter round. So he kind of knew that he was planning for this long round and he wanted to thin his deck.
I think this round is going to be, will Reaver Scout get a target? That might just decide the game, because I think House of Cards knows exactly what this list is made up of. It's a net deck where a lot of people are playing a very similar list, and Artifact Impression right away deals with the crewman. Ronvid is out of here, and he's at 12 points as well, so it was a great target to hit.
Yeah, I don't think he's as incessant as he claims to be with that play, and that's gotta hurt. Like we said, the House of Cards, he's denying the crewman, and that is the crewman that's meant to come back when you kill it. But you can't kill it if it's turned into a little jade statue.
And we have so many Thunders going to come down from the skies on HanaChan. We have Ida, we have the Mercs into Thunder, the Sages into Thunder, Recon to Fish for those two bronzes as well. I think he's played both of his half-elf hunters, and also he has, I think, all the archers in hand.
I think it's worth noting that I don't think the House of Cards list is the one that HanaChan was expecting when he saw Ethnay. And that's the beauty of the first round, is that the players don't know each other's decks. Well, unless you're Malegian and Demorcus. But in this case, he didn't know, and maybe he expected something like Shoop. We see the Ida come out here to clear skies and just remove that rain. It's a fair play, in a long round you don't really want weather.
And it was actually a positive trade for House of Cards because you got the rain only does 1 damage and you got the +2 for the clear and the buff. So HanaChan, not his greatest moment there. Lost 1 point on that Silver Mage trade, but he had to try, He had to maybe try that maybe he didn't have Ida, didn't have it available, and rain could rack up a lot of points in 8 or 9 rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Like with Death Mold, you have the option, I believe, of Alzur's Thunder. So, you're saying, do I think my opponent can clear this weather? And he thought, maybe not. You take that risk, and if it pays off, it adds up to a lot of points across 8 turns. If it doesn't pay off, then you are actually sacrificing a fair number of points. So this is the thing in tournaments, like players take risks.
Because the Isengrim into an Ida attempt doesn't find it. Could have gone for weather because obviously once you see Death Mold come down, there probably is another clear. And it's a bold move, but if it works out in a long round, that's a lot of points just from weather.
That is true. We see the spy going down for House of Cards, not the spy, the ambush. Sorry,
the ambush, yeah.
HanaChan, not sure what it's going to be. We'll see if he can smell this out or not.
I mean, there aren't too many options. We're down to just very few now after so many patches, so he'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, it really comes down to whether it's a Milena, so whether he realizes that Milena, she does charm a unit of 5 strength or lower. Currently, that's going to take that little jade figurine across to the side of House of Cards.
In House of Cards, you're giving HanaChan a chance to get the Reaver Scout out. There are 3 batting rams in this list.
Yeah, and I love this 1 point there onto the commando because Milena, she takes the biggest unit up to 5. So by making that a 5, that does mean that Milena's going to steal it. That also clues HanaChan in that it's not to reveal, but I mean, in either case, there's not a huge amount that he can do.
Yeah, I mean, that was a play that House of Cards saw as priority, had to go for that, but he opened up the window for the Reaver Scout to come out onto that battering ram, so it was a tough choice, especially if you don't know your opponent's hand perfectly, you don't know if there is going to be a dead Reaver Scout or not. He went for the clear point play where he could get that maximum value.
Yeah, ultimately, it wasn't the best line of play, but I think it makes sense, knowing what it is that is face down. And here we see the half-elf hunters going down onto the board. Have we seen Ailerin? But there she is. She comes out when there are 6 elves, or half-elves apparently count too, on the board.
And that was the surprise we were waiting for. But I think, in general, HanaChan has the better card, a better hand. Once the Reaver Scout isn't dead, I think he has a bit of a lead here. He has 2 golds. DJ, obviously, you never know what you're going to get. But most of the time, it's pretty good. And Selkirk as well is just guaranteed value.
Yeah, Selkirk, it's kind of denial. I mean, there's nothing, like you said, House of Cards, he doesn't have engine, so there's nothing that he necessarily wants to deny. But with all those small units on the board, you've got the 1s, you've got the 4s. There's Fog.
It's still worth it. It's still, going to be 10 points instead of 9, so it's definitely worth it. A little bit late to the party, but I think HanaChan definitely made the right decision there.
Yeah, Vader Maker, a card we're seeing in a lot of decks recently. It's such a great tech card. Gives you that option of weather, but also the removal, plus the 4 points on the board. It kind of fits into more or less any deck if you have a silver slot.
When you see so much greatswords, it makes sense to include such a versatile card that can also, zap those greatswords into long ships and so many other engine units out of the way, like Farseers we saw with Demorkis as well. So it's a card that if you have the slot open, you don't know what to put in, you put in that card because it makes sense in so many matchups.
Yeah, I think it fits the same niche as cards like Deathmold and Ida, because both of them also have that Alza's Thunder on them. So they have options, and that's what Vader Maker gives you. It gives you options, and I think in a tournament setting, that's pretty good.
It's not the greatest DJ I've ever seen. I'm going to be honest. That might be, a pretty average DJ, but I think it still will be enough for HanaChan to make it here. He does still have Selkirk. He has pretty decent machines left. Not too much crewman, just that one surviving man in the back. We saw one to get zapped immediately, so there's going to be 1 crewman, but that's about it.
That is true. It does provide him that extra point on the battering ram, allowing him to kill a 4 instead of a 3. I don't believe there's actually any 3s available. Yeah, House of Cards doesn't have any 3s. I think he's got 1 now, actually. But like I said, it gives you that extra point. And as we've seen in this tournament, 1 point does matter.
And Selkirk only going to find 17 points of value. There's no bigger targets right now. Archer is going to be the highest with 8. So not optimal value either, but I think it will be enough to beat out Ethne. Not too many great spells in this exact matchup. If we're talking about great swords, it's very different, but there's not really a great target you want to compress. There's not really a great target you want to zap. You don't get maximum points. The Archer, again, isn't great. Fog is still ticking as well for House of Cards, so it's looking pretty good for HanaChan here. He might take this win, but I think House of Cards maybe expected this. His goal is to target greatswords and beat greatswords. Everything else is just, the buffer in the middle.
I think that's fair to say. This was HanaChan's strongest list in terms of this matchup, so seeing the victory isn't surprising. And the thing is with the control, they're solid plays in and of themselves. You've got like 10-point plays, 11-point plays, 12-point plays, but when we've seen other decks where their bronzers are doing, 15-point plays, 20-point plays, that's where you kind of start to see the weakness of this deck in this sort of matchup, because HanaChan, his machines, they just give him a little bit more. No
need to play the last card. HanaChan playing it cool, telling his opponent, I got too many cards. I don't need this one. Let this last one here. And also trying to save, maybe a bit of a secret there, even though he won with it, so it doesn't really matter. But keeping it kind of secret for the next round, maybe.
I think that's true. I think the Dijkstra combined with the Reaver Scout really did kind of spell disaster for House of Cards, and maybe if those cards had gone differently, the outcome might have been different. But this is Gwent. Things don't always go in your favor, as we've seen.
We're going right into game 2. No pause here. Both players, on fire, ready to go, and we're going to see Henselt finally. So it's a new Henselt, new and improved. We see Tormented Mages, we see Thunder, we see a very control-heavy list. Cyprian Wily as well, which is a card you don't see very often. And HanaChan bringing the old favorite, Deathwish. He loves this deck. He plays it, quite a few tournaments, and no one's brought it this tournament. It's kind of fallen out of favor over Consume and just other factions like Storytel.
And Imlerith Sabbath. I think that it's unsurprising to see Henselt on Red Coin. This is kind of where we expected House of Cards to pull out this list. But it is going to be an interesting one in terms of the play. And Dry Pass coming out of HanaChan.
He says, I like long rounds. If you want to go into a round 2 that's going to be, you're going to play into it, go into a long round. If I can, overcome your points and then get into my nice engine time with the Arc Spores and Fog, for example, with Dagon as well, you can be in trouble. So this kind of forces, you give control of the round to the game to House of Cards, but it also forces them to either play into round 2 and maybe slip up and lose that extra card, or go into a very long round 3 where Arc Spores, Fog, and all kinds of Deathwish effects will really, really do a lot of damage.
It's going to be interesting to see how House of Cards chooses to play this one, and whether he feels he has the control to overcome the Deathwish. Combined with the fact there's also Dagon. I mean, we do see Deathmold in the House of Cards, so maybe he's not so worried about the Fog. But with that said, if you use the Deathmold for clear, you're then losing one of your removals.
And there is a Frightener in HanaChan's deck. It's not in his hand, but it's in his deck somewhere. He's going to try and find it, but for now, he's at House of Cards' mercy. This is bleed time for House of Cards. He's going to slowly, you know, maybe you can just zap this right away, nothing to hit with the 4 points of damage, so he saves himself those 4 points. Pretty optimal play there.
Yeah, I really like that zap. The Archospore, when it dies, it does deal 4 points to a random target on the side of House of Cards, but you got no targets, then it's not going to hit anything.
This is a great play. Dao is really what really gives Griffin and Cyclops a lot of points, especially the Griffins. If you artifact compress it, it can't come back with Brewis Ritual. It cannot be rezzed, and it cannot, you know, come back into the game. There's only 2 in the deck for Hanachan as well, so that's 1 down already, and the second one isn't even in hand.
Yeah, this is looking very costly for Hanachan because he's so reliant on those Death Wish units with those Griffins in hand. He's got 3 Griffins in this deck, and also the Cyclopses to a certain extent. Like, Cyclopses allow him to remove units from House of Cards side of the board, but it doesn't really matter because House of Cards really doesn't have any units.
There's a 9-point. I think Hanachan knows he's being bled. He's going to say, you want to believe me? Fine. Here's my 9-point Griffin. No Deathless unit activated. I don't really care because I'm 24 points up. As long as he doesn't find his spy, he's not really playing for points. He's playing to just survive and wait till House of Cards wants to pass. Yeah,
in some ways it also kind of forces House of Cards to start using his control on targets that he's not, you know, gaining as much of a benefit from. We see this here with the battering ram. You know, he can hit the 2-point Jade figurine and then hit the Griffin, I suppose, but that's not really great. I mean, like, yes, you're weakening a Griffin, but it's a Griffin.
I think in the end, both plays aren't going to matter this turn. This is like up till House of Cards wants to pass. Every play here is just going to be thinning, preparing for round 3, creating, you know, the best possible hand and situation for round 3. And obviously, every turn that passes, Hanachan is losing a lot of value on his Fogs, on his Arc Spores, and in his whole Death Wish synergy. So I think in general, House of Cards doesn't have the greatest round 3 finisher, but he does have cards like Shawnee, cards like Saltkirk, maybe Villain Tritonmirth into, you know, the big units that Hanachan does have. He does have the Griffins, he does have the Cyclops as well at 11, so as long as more turns pass and Hanachan can't do anything about this, House of Cards is happy to bleed and happy to make round 3 as short as possible.
With that said, we do see House of Cards committing Death Mold for Weatherclear. And using Death Mold for Weatherclear, I think that tells him that he wants this round to go a little bit longer. You know, if you're not wanting a longer round, then it doesn't matter if Fog is ticking. But by clearing that, he's saying, you know, I don't want you to have that attrition. And it kind of looks to me like House of Cards is trying to force out Hanachan's Brewis Ritual being the one that allows him to resurrect units from the graveyard, Death Wish units. And in his graveyard, 2 Death Wish units, 2 Archospores.
And you can't let Hanachan get too far away because then the Hero Pass becomes a thing 3 or 4 turns away from when House of Cards wants us to go to the very end possibly of round 2. So I think he knows he has to try and make it so the points there's a gap, but it's a gap that he can, you know, take back in 1 or 2 cards if he needs to.
Yeah, you see Hanachan also there with the Rot Fiend on the board. Rot Fiend, when it dies, deals 2 damage to the units opposite, but there's so few units on House of Cards side of the board that it's like Rot Fiend isn't seeing the Death Wish value that it wants. That's a card that usually is for She-Troll of Vergen, which is in Hanachan's deck, but not in his hand.
I think House of Cards wants to keep these gold cards for sure for next turn. Shawnee into a Death Mold, for example, is a great set of points there. Saltkirk as well into the Cyclops, for example, is a perfect optimal value there. 19 points for Saltkirk.
I think the one thing that House of Cards needs to be careful of here is that Trisk Telekinesis is in Hanachan's deck, and that gives him a removal. So he has to be very careful about how he chooses to use this Hensel. You know, he can push this round, but he has to make sure that he has an opportunity to use Hensel, because as we were saying, Hensel, you don't want a 3-point Hensel, and that Trisk could be a zap, kill your target, and then your House of Cards comes tumbling down.
And if you play Battering Ram, for example, you save that for round 3, and you get Wisp's Tribute into Mandrake and just deletes that option, you have a dead Hensel. So you have to see, you know, what deck your opponent might be playing, what options and what answers he might have to your own strategy, and really, you know, say, do I want to risk it and I need Hensel for round 3 to win this, or can I play Hensel now and try and thin my deck and maybe draw into Villain Tritonmirth and Scorch, for example, later on?
Yeah, I think with the Shawnee and the Saltkirk, like, I would say House of Cards is safe if he finds an opportunity to use the Hensel, even if maybe you're not drawing as well, just to make sure that you do get that value, because Dagon does have options for removal. You know, we see things like Cyclops, like the Mandrake, which is in a lot of lists. We see the Telekinesis into House of Cards' own Elzer's Thunder, because obviously it's either unit special card, either player's special card. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
This was looking like a pass from House of Cards. I think he's going to stick on this round for a little bit longer.
I think the thing is also Dagon is still there. You'd expect a second Foglet, which makes Dagon a pretty powerful play as well. So, you know, House of Cards, yeah, it's really difficult. Like, when do you call it?
Yeah, LpHanachan has a great hand, really. I mean, he's keeping his big boys for round 3. He's really not scared. Even though he has to be proactive and he has to play first and he won't have last say against cards like Villain Trenenmirth, he does have Brutish Ritual, Triss, and Wisp's Tribute, plus Dagon. That's a really, really good amount of cards to have, and there's a big gap right now. House of Cards is to start being wary of the hero pass, is to be wary of how many points he has in hand, and how far he can go into this.
I think that's fair. There's a 34-point deficit on the side of House of Cards at the moment, but with 4 cards in hand, I think in the current state of Gwent, that's usually okay. House of Cards opting now to take that pass and conserving that Hensel. He does have the Shani, so it'll be interesting to see how this turns out and whether the controller becomes the controlled.
And we're going to see if Battering Ram gets countered by Wisp's Tribute. It might just get countered, so we'll see if House of Cards expects this. The muzzle's fantastic on Archspore, for example. It's a really, really good draw. I think House of Cards is happy with that mulligan for sure.
Yeah, House of Cards is actually running muzzle in all 3 of the lists, all 3 of his 4 lists. So every list except for the Yan list has that muzzle in it. Like, you can tell that he's really there to shut down engines. And this is the kind of situation where we see it pay off. You know, not when you're muzzling a 6-point Blue Stripe Commando, but when you're muzzling, well, a 6-point Dow.
He goes for the Dow instead of the Archspore. It's an interesting read. He's expecting another Griffin. There is a Slizzard that can pull that out, so that's a good read. We'll see if I mean, it's going to be pretty similar to points in general, but it does deny a lot more from the Griffin, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Dow is House of Cards doesn't know that LpHanachan only has 2 Dows, so in that sort of play, you're just kind of being wary of things. You're being wary of Slizzards, you're being wary of Griffins, and taking that Dow across to your side just means that, you know, if you kill it, it's in the graveyard, there's still Slizzard. If you take it, it's in your graveyard if it eventually dies. So it's kind of denying that graveyard.
It's going to come down to this Hensel. If the Hensel is dead, I mean, obviously House of Cards is completely out of this game. He didn't draw into Villain Trenenmirth either. That's maybe a tool he needed, not in this matchup specifically, but in general, it's a card you want to draw with his Hensel control list.
I think it's a difficult one because, you know, how long can he stall? And he kind of wants the Archespore to tick 1 more point on that Dow. I mean, I guess what you want is the Archespore to tick the point on the Dow, and then if you kill an Archespore, the 4 points to go onto the Dow. That Dow turns into the little lesser Dows, 4 points apiece. It's actually point gain.
It is true. See, LpHanachan, he was against the ropes. He got bled out round 2, but he was able to keep all his best cards. We're going to see that's also an option for the Hensel as well. I think Siege Master, there are still 2 left in the deck, so definitely a correct option.
The problem is you don't ideally want to pull Siege Masters until you have a machine, so it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out.
It seems to be the Mandrake bait. He's going to go for it. He Mandrakes the Siege Master out of the game. No way Hensel can pull that out, but there are still Battering Ram options, so in the end, House of Cards had 2 options to get that Hensel. He knew the Mandrake was the thing, but he had the chance to play around that still. There's a big point gap.
Yeah, and that Triss is pulling Recon and Elzer's Thunder. There's no question about it. You know, we saw with Malegion whether or not he would get Ointment. LpHanachan is guaranteed Elzer's Thunder on that. So House of Cards needs to kind of play this right. If he plays the Selkirk and, that's playing into LpHanachan's strategy. I think there's no way LpHanachan doesn't kill that.
House of Cards had 2 answers, or 2, you know, effects, but LpHanachan had 2 answers to both of them. I think he is going to play the Triss into the Thunder, deny the Hensel, and a 3-point leader normally does not win you games. In this case, for House of Cards, it might look like a loss here because LpHanachan, there's only 2 bronze special cards in this matchup. Not many more, not like Spelltell, for example, or other decks that are spell heavy, like Alchemy, for example, as well, or Soldiers. In this case, there's no luck involved whatsoever.
This is the thing, because all of LpHanachan's fog comes from cards which spawn the fog rather than draw it from your deck. So there's no fog to get. There's the Elzer's Thunder we saw straight onto the Battering Ram. That is a 3-point Hensel. 5 points to 24 points. Selkirk is not strong enough.
And it might just be the pass round. He's doing the math, but this math is hard to do. Dagon is a ton of points as well, so I think really there is no chance for House of Cards. I think the Hensel is tricky, like I said before. It's really risky to keep it. There are many ways that your opponent can play around it. We saw 2 here. I think LpHanachan also had the perfect hand going into round 3. He was able to keep all his gold in round 2, and it made it quite easy, even though he's being bled. He had so many points from just developing his Death Wish game and his long round game with Fog and Archspores that he could really, bully House of Cards out of round 2 without being bled too hard, and he kept all his gold and his leader for round 3.
Yeah, that dry pass really, really worked for LpHanachan. I think LpHanachan, the moment he saw that Ethnite deck, he smelled out the control list. He figured out what it is that House of Cards is going to try and do, and managed to find ways of overcoming it. And House of Cards passing, LpHanachan passing 2-0 to LpHanachan, but great swords.
This is where the matchup really starts. House of Cards made 3 deck lists that completely try and counter great swords. So So this is, I mean, you're going to be on blue coin on some of these matches, so it's going to be unfavored. But you have a deck that relies on just thundering and thundering and thundering and thundering and getting rid of Great Swords completely. This isn't a completely black and white matchup like, let's say, Ethnic Control against Consume, for example, where you can really just shut it down the strategy and your opponent forfeits. There are ways for Great Swords to come back into these games. But it is, this is what House of Cards prepared for, and this is where the matchup really starts. He's down 2-0, but that really doesn't mean too much when you're just preparing to counter one single deck in this Conquest format.
That is true. Like across House of Cards 3 decks that he's playing, every deck, Artifact Compression, Artifact Compression, Artifact Compression, 2 decks Mandrake, Thunders everywhere. We've got Villain Trettenmouth, we've got Muzzles, we've got
Yorvith as well.
Exactly. We've got Vilgefortz, we've got Triss Telekinesis into all sorts of different things. Like it's going to be tough for Hanachan. Like on the flip side, he has 3 chances. He's got 3 lives.
And this is how House of Cards going to counter this. He's going to go blue coin, going to go reactive into round 2 and say, Hanachan, you want to go into a short round 3? I'm going to cancel you out every single play you make in round 2. Your Great Swords are not going to get up a single point, and that's going to be his game plan. We'll see if he has enough Thunders, enough control to deal with not only Great Swords and ships, but also the reses from the Corsairs, and also just the reses in general. Sigrifa as well, for example.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how Hanachan chooses to play this round, because a lot of players talk about developing your graveyard. If you have a deck with Resurrects, you need cards in your graveyard to resurrect. But because House of Cards is playing such control-heavy lists, House of Cards is going to be putting cards into Hanachan's graveyard, so it's not as important for Hanachan to develop that graveyard in this round compared to in some other matchups.
It's very true.
So I think we wait and see what he has to do. And out comes the Great Sword. So he's playing into this round. And then he's like, House of Cards, do you want to play ball? We'll play ball.
And this is a great target for either Muzzle or Yorvith. Both great options.
Yeah, the Great Sword from hand is an 8. So usually we also see one from Crack. Crack strengthens the unit by 2. That brings it out of muzzle range. But we've seen a muzzle, and an Artifact Compression. We talked about setting up the graveyard. You can't set up the graveyard if you kidnap the units and turn them into toy soldiers.
This might just be a Thunder.
I think at this point the Thunder is fine. Like normally people say deny either the ships or deny the Great Swords, focus on one. But in this situation, he doesn't necessarily need to do that because there's just so much control to be had. And
because Hanachan committed into this round, he's probably going to go a card down into round 3 because every play that House of Cards makes, he's adding those extra points from the tutors, from the gold card extra points, for example, Muzzle. It not only deals with the Great Sword, it also takes it back, so you're adding +8. Same with Yorvith, that adds +6. Same with the Merc that adds +1. So that's going to be the one option he has. To get that 11-point Longship, it's going to get rolling, and there is no tall unit counter in this deck. There's no Scorch, there's no Shiru, there's no real option to deal with that 11 strength ship unless you start pinging it down with archers and then zap it.
Alternatively, though, Artifact Compression, Ethne.
That's the one option. You can even do it, a few turns from now. Your Longship is going to steal value from your own board on Hanachan's side, and then you can Artifact Compression it when it's at 25 or so. I
think you do wait to see what happens with the Artifact Compression. Artifact Compression is one of these cards that you really want to wait with. You don't need to play it early. If you see an opportunity to maybe kill the ship, you can always utilize that. You've got enough control also in your list that you can afford to just zap it. You've got Ithlin double zap as well, so if you were really starting to get a bit anxious about it, you could kill it that way as well. This is the thing, House of Cards has so many options to stop Hanachan, and I don't think Hanachan's going to weasel his way out of this one.
And once the Aileron comes out, the tempo game is just +6 more to House of Cards as well. So even if Spies are played, House of Cards has Nature's Gifts into ADC, into Yavin, so he has all the options he needs to really take control of this game.
And this is kind of, I guess, a game of patience. Like Hanachan, he is in control. I think he's just trying to kind of develop some of his units, develop some of his graveyard. But because all of the Great Swords are dead, Great Swords are your res targets. He's not being allowed to develop his graveyard. And
that's a great Yorvith right there. Deals with the perfect 8-point Longship. Buffs your hand as well, gets those extra points of value over the course of this round and also for round 3. And 1 or 2 points, you might think it doesn't matter, it's insignificant, but in the end, we've seen games that end up 1 or 2 points away. I mean, we've seen a lot of them. These players are very close in terms of skill, in terms of the deck they bring, so it might just be what decides the game later on.
And it's hard to say how long Hanachan is gonna take this, because I don't think he can push hard enough that he gets an opportunity to pass and regain that card advantage.
Even with the trade from Ulrich into Yavin, there's just too big of a gap. And the Longship is adding points, that is true, but I mean, House of Cards he has Ethylene, for example, he has the Ethne as well. He has the options he needs to get a lot of tempo. And it's just difficult in some ways to watch, knowing the hands as Hanachan, tries. This is kind of like the, the Imlerith Eridan match all over again. You can see the player trying to find a way to win, trying to find a win condition, and ultimately getting shut down time and time again. And that restore there is LpHanachan saying, you know, I'm trying to create a gap here, and he's probably going to find a pass, because that is a very big play to commit to this round. House of Cards, going to zap in, going to say, LpHanachan, you want to pass? Go for it. But I still have, you know, never mind. LpHanachan comes and joins the party, and House of Cards says, you cannot pass this turn. I am not going to let you pass.
Yeah, House of Cards is taking the Great Swords and putting them in the sea with that play. And LpHanachan's such a nice little card. It's something that a lot of players, you know, went back when Elf Swarm was a thing, you always used to have to consider, but it's kind of not seen so much recently. So seeing her come out here is kind of a blast from the past.
And anytime he needs tempo, he's going to play Ethne into Artifact Compression and compress that ship. And the more turns that pass, the better that tempo play is going to be. So I think House of Cards is completely in control. He doesn't really have a finisher, but why would you want a finisher when you're a card up on your opponent in round 3? You don't need it. You're just 2 cards up. The value should be there or you win the game. This is another Hail Mary from LpHanachan. He tries to go for the and he's going to find it with the ADC being used here. Going to go up to 15 and the ship ticking as well.
Oof. It's just, it's difficult. I think these are the kind of matches that are difficult to watch when they do feel incredibly one-sided. And this was House of Cards' strategy, though. This is exactly how he intends to win this tournament and to win this matchup, to be honest. And, you know, a lot of players, they didn't have great swords. Pronia didn't have great swords. Maleesian doesn't have great swords. Colamon doesn't even have Skellige. Demorcus doesn't have great swords. So this kind of strategy, he's gotten fairly lucky in terms of the bracket.
And Ida's still available. I think, yeah, he's going to try and just use Artifact Compression. This guarantees he's going to go card up. This is what says, you know, I'm going to commit my leader. I'm going to commit Artifact Compression, but I'm going to do it in a way where you cannot catch up now. It's impossible. No matter if you can play Jenga, you can play Herald Houndstone. It's pretty hard for you to catch up. No longships are ticking anymore, and that Greatsword will be killed in this turn before it's able to grow. So again, only 8-point Greatswords in LpHanachan's graveyard.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he uses this Sigurdrifa and whether he opts to play Jenga this round in order to actually have something to resurrect. Because the way this is going, you know, he's running out of big resurrects. Jenga, at least, he strengthens, right? He gets points that carry into the graveyard. So at least if you commit him this round with the Sigurdrifa, that gives you that big resurrect. But if you're card down, does it really matter?
And LpHanachan, he has the better finishers. He has the Renew. He has the Jenga Fred. He has the Sigurdrifa, but he doesn't have a great graveyard. There's no, you know, developed greatswords, and he's going to be a card down. I mean, in the end, obviously Haim cannot copy spies anymore, thankfully. Those times have gone.
It is LpHanachan.
Does
he want his own LpHanachan? I don't think
fine.
so.
I think Ida's a bit better.
Just a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see this, though, because House of Cards, his list is very reactive. And when he wins this round 2, he has to go first round 3. So he can lose out on a lot of value if that's the case. But he does have Isengrim Outlaw in hand, so he could try and spawn an elf and find himself something proactive.
And he still has one more half-elf hunter, so he can even try and, you know, fish for one with Mulligan. I think the only way House of Cards loses this is if his Ithling bricks. It's the only way. He has to be careful with the Mulligans, make sure he has at least 1 Thunder left in his graveyard, and I think he should be fine. This is going to be a pretty good tempo swing here for LpHanachan, but again, I think just not enough. The Greatsword does grow. It will be a decent little boost there, but if he wants to, House of Cards has the option to play the Ithling now, get rid of that Mulligan situation like we saw with Hensel before, not risk it, and just zap a few, you know, zap the Greatsword now, get rid of that as well, and play it safer going into round 3.
Yeah, I mean, he does have a Mulligan in round 3, so it's maybe not as risky as something like a Hensel, where you're not the one in control of that. You know, you're not the one choosing to Mulligan or not. But we actually see her come out to play here. The double Alzur's Thunder, Jenga down to 5 points.
And again, he just stays in control of this game. He has the Isengrim. He's going to probably keep that, like you said, to have a proactive play going first in round 3. And being a card up, I mean, you should be winning this. You have literally 25% more cards than your opponent. That is a lot. That's a big percentage in Gwent. So if he has worse finishers, he does. But I think there's no chance he loses this, especially with no chance of bricking. I believe there is no chance. Ithling out of the way. And there were 2 Thunders anyway, so there was... That's fine. Recon is a half-elf hunter as well, a proactive play. So he has his outs. I think he's played this perfectly, and this really shows what you can do in Gwent if you target a deck.
And this is the thing that we've been kind of talking about. You know, some people, they go for the short round plays, and how do you beat a short round if you don't have a short round? You have card advantage, and this is why, you know, red coin versus blue coin is so important. It's why spies are so important, and it's why, you know, in terms of shoot decks, that can be very pivotal if you're on blue coin, because you have the options to draw cards and gain advantage. But on the flip side, they can come back to bite you. Like if you have a spy round 3, you know, we saw with Colamon when he had a spy round 3, just there's no point playing it.
And LpHanachan, he has Renew. he has great goals like Coral and Dandelion Poet, but they're in the back of his deck, so he can't use them. He has to play Renew into Heim into Ida, I guess, is decent, but again, not the craziest Renew, not the craziest Heim either. Unfortunately, he didn't draw into Dandelion Poet or Coral, but I think in the end, it wouldn't have done too much to change the course of this game.
Yeah, the Renew I quite like because it does give you that secondary Coral, and so in the mirror, in terms of the Greatsword mirror, that gives you good ways of shutting down your opponent. I mean, we saw Artifact Compression twice and how that has shut down HanaChan. HanaChan, the way his deck is built, he could do that via Coral, but you know, in this situation, he doesn't have the cards, and it's not really great targets anyway.
Decent options there. Hattori can look for a Thunder, I believe, with the Elven Merc. I believe that is an option if he needs it. I think it's a decent one. He's going to go for it. Not the greatest amount of points, but still pretty decent. 4 points plus the damage, so 8 points total, plus the 2 points. I mean, 10-point gold, not great, but it's better than a brick.
I don't know, I think the Milena there was all right as well. He had enough turns for it to pay off. There was a 4-point unit on the board. It's probably something you'd do the maths and work it out. It's not, in this kind of situation, I guess it's not pivotal.
There's a great Longship and there's a great Ida, or a great Sage. I mean, both of these are answers, and this is what we expected. When you bring a deck that targets great swords and Longships, you get the targets going.
Yeah, we do not see a single great sword or a single Longship on the side of HanaChan, and this is something that's going to make some players, I think, very happy to see. There's a 5-point lead, but the thing is, you've got Alza's Thunder. The fog is not enough. Like HanaChan, he put up a fair fight. But House of Cards, he was ready for this.
I'd like to say I'm surprised, but this was expected, I think, with the decks that we were seeing. And also, House of Cards gets the win on the blue coin, which is the one factor that could maybe, bring down his percentage a bit in that matchup and say, Greatsword on red coin is great. You have to, dry pass, maybe, play into your opponent's game plan, but I think he played it perfectly. The pivotal moment was that Aileron coming out right when it needed to, right when it was looking like a close game with HanaChan could finally pass, and Aileron just popped out and gave him the 3-point lead, which really allowed HanaChan, or denied HanaChan from passing and getting that card advantage back. And we're going to see more of this. And now House of Cards is on red coin, which is reactive, which can answer your opponent's deck. And there is only one deck left for HanaChan. He has to play Greatsword. This is similar to Consume. If you target a deck and you know your opponent might bring it, it's going to be, really successful.
And I expect to see King Hensel here. It's red coin for House of Cards. Take 2 with King Hensel. And the thing is, HanaChan, he doesn't have the same denial. I mean, he does have Renew, and he does have Coral. So that he has options, but he did show his Renew. He's shown that hand, so at the very least, House of Cards should be expecting it, and he should be very kind of cautious about how that Hensel gets played, because he's seen it. He's seen that 3-point Hensel. He doesn't want to relive that, and I think that's one of the ways that HanaChan is going to stand a chance in this matchup, is if he can find the Coral, Renew, and hit the right targets.
Going to be a little bit less control here from, it's going to be a different kind of control. You have a Scorch, you have the Villain Treadermouth, you don't have as many Thunders, you have the Tormented Mages, but it's not the same as, Ethian, where you can replay Thunder, like 10 times with the Sages, Elven Mercs, Ida, Ethian as well. There's a lot of Thunders there, and really this is, all you need is Thunders here. All you need is the, unless you're pulling the Greatsword from Kraken Crate, all you really need is the Thunder to deal with both Greatswords and Longships.
Yeah, I think in that deck there's something like 9 possible Thunders in the Ethne deck. That's not quite the same in the Hensel deck. We have 3 Alza's Thunders and the 2 Tormented Mages, plus the Death mod, so you do have 4, but we also have some interesting choices like Cyprian Wiley. He weakens a unit by 4 points, so he's basically similar to cards like Mandrake, where you take away all of the points, so very strong against those Longships.
And the Greatswords. Important to note as well, Villain Treadermouth was not played last game. HanaChan does not know this card exists. It hasn't been played commonly over the course of the meta the past few months. And there we go. Artifact Compression, when you can't zap something, you compress it. That's how it works with House of Cards.
Yeah, pretty much. And the Villain Treadermouth, it's interesting because it's kind of like a get out of jail free card, like a backup plan. If HanaChan manages to get his engines going, manages to get that big Greatsword, that's kind of okay, because if he does resurrect it, House of Cards, provided he times the Villain Treadermouth appropriately, can just completely remove it.
And the lack of information really, it doesn't give HanaChan the chance to play, a cheeky spy in round 3, to play around that the Villain Treadermouth, for example, and make House of Cards scorch his own unit. If you have information, you can do those kind of plays and say, I bet you didn't expect this. You save the spy with Heim or with Skjall, for example, and play in round 3. It's not the greatest play, but it gets to counter Villain Treadermouth in a way. In this case, HanaChan has no idea this is being played. He can expect it. It is a control Hensel list, but we have not seen Villain Treaderman's played for the past 3 or 4 metas, so it's not something you have at the top of your mind.
And the thing that's also quite exciting, I think, about Villain Treaderman is a lot of the time the big units are quite close in points. So when you're running Villain Treaderman in conjunction with Battering Rams and Reinforced Ballistas, there's always the potential to get that double Villain Treaderman, that double burn. So if Hanachan's units become kind of too similar in points, even if they're not that big, if they're close in points, House of Cards could potentially just burn his dreams of victory away.
Especially on red coin, where you normally expect the red coin player on such a powerful deck like Hensel to have last say in round 3. So he has going to have card advantage, and he's going to be able to say, you can do anything you want to your board, but I'm going to have last say with a Battering Ram or with a Reinforced Ballista, and I'm going to touch your units a bit, hit him here, hit him there, and get the full value from Villain Treaderman.
And there's Cyprian Wiley. There is the card that I don't think many players would have expected, but House of Cards has played it. The cat is out of the bag, the chickens are out of the coop, and that greatsword is not looking so great.
Yeah, Cyprian Wiley normally going to be against Sneckers, I think. It's going to be the main, really what you want to target with it. I think, obviously, with Mandrakes and all the different cards that House of Cards has, he was targeting both Greatswords and Neckers because it's kind of easy to target Consume, and you can target Greatsword at the same time, and Longshift with Mandrake as well. It's a synergy that works well if you're trying to control your opponent. So it makes sense, and like you said, yeah. Cyprian Wiley, maybe in this matchup, not the greatest. Maybe would have preferred some kind of mage that can zap the Greatsword immediately, but still pretty good.
Yeah, I think the thing is, by doing this, you're denying the growth on that Greatsword. That Greatsword takes then 4 turns just to get back to a regular Greatsword. So it kind of buys House of Card a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit of space where he doesn't have to worry about that crazy engine that Greatswords creates.
And this gives HanaChan a chance to pass if he wants to. He's played his Spy. He lets House of Card win the round, but he's going to be a card down. And it gives HanaChan the chance to kind of evade that pressure from Hensel, where you can overcome you while you don't have card advantage and you can end up losing on even, which is terrible.
The mother goddess.
But it's going to stay in this round and give maybe House of Cards a chance to play his own Spy.
Yeah, House of Cards, his Spy, I mean, it's looking, I was going to say it's looking pretty good here. And ooh, that's another card that HanaChan hasn't seen yet.
One more turn and that boat is going to be vaporized, or it has a chance to be vaporized. We'll see when House of Cards decides to unleash the fury of 1,000 Suns.
Yeah, we talked about House of Cards burning HanaChan's hopes away, and HanaChan has to be so cautious with this. We've got a 13, a 9, and a 13, and House of Cards with that recon potentially could find a way to line a lot of cards up, not just 2, potentially 3, depending on how these points work out and what HanaChan chooses to do.
And the Coral might come down this turn as well. Not going to find a better target than Udalryk, I think. There really isn't a high point unit that you're going to have in House of Cards' deck. And also, we see both Spies out, so Villain Treaderman has no contest now. Going into the last round, HanaChan definitely has the higher base strength units, and if Villain Treaderman is timed correctly in round 3, it's definitely going to vaporize either a Greatsword or a Jenga Fret or a Longship that gets, ticks up.
Yeah, but you see House of Cards actually not opting to utilize the Coral onto the Udalryk.
He's trying to deny those Hensel targets with the Battering Rams, but here comes a Reinforced Ballista to say, I want to join this party too. I haven't made my appearance yet, but here I am.
That is true, and unfortunately, the 2 points there's not a feasible way where you can line up an odd number and an even number with 2. So I think just kind of picking his targets there, making sure that there's nothing that necessarily is going to work. Well, actually, that's a lie because the boats shoot each other. And
this creates a situation where all of a sudden,
it's getting hot in here.
It's getting quite hot for and HanaChan's like, nope, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, I'm
out of here.
Oh. It would have been so good. Those plays you don't see. I still like the Mandrake there. I think you're denying Graveyard by making targets weaker. The fewer big targets you have in the Graveyard, the better, and it wins him the round. And he's unlikely to need Mandrake, I think, in this final round because he's got the Scorch and because he has the Villain Treaderman.
We're back to what we said. I mean, Red Coin Hensel gets control of the game, goes into round 2 with Scorch and Villain Treaderman and a Tormented Mage into Thunder. As long as he finds a semi-decent Hensel, that's the only thing I'm kind of worried about. I think this should be House of Cards' game to win. There really isn't, I don't see HanaChan being able to dodge so many different effects that could really ruin his game plan.
Yeah, I guess the question is if HanaChan can deny the Hensel, but the only way he can deny the Hensel is if he finds that Renew. He does have Dandelion, so Dandelion, that draws you an extra card, so if he doesn't find it on the mulligan going into round 3, he can try and find it with Dandelion, but if he doesn't find it, I don't think he has, he doesn't have options to stop Hensel.
Yeah, there's no real control from Greatswords. They play their own game, they play it very well, In most cases, they have enough points to say, you know, I don't care about your game plan. Look at mine. I'm gonna, you know, buff my dudes up. We're gonna get really strong. I'm so good. But in this case, no control means you can't really stop your opponent from hurting you or stop that Hensel, which is a big play to stop. We saw it last game against Deathwish, or 2 games ago, where if you stop Hensel, it's a 3-point leader. It's a high-risk leader.
And I mean, with that said, I do really like the inclusion of Renew by HanaChan. In terms of being able to bring back Coral, being able to bring back Heim. You know, Heim, it lets you play your opponent's silvers, and that's pretty good. Like in the mirror, that's always good. Skellige silvers are good in Skellige decks. In a lot of situations, that can be very powerful. Double Coral, we've seen, you know, the power of artifact compression, and I think he's gone for great swords, but he's teched it in such a way in order to try and help him in a tournament setting.
We see no Renew yet. There's no chance there. Tormented Mage might just come down here, I think. He could also let that Longship grow. And that way, you know, guarantee the chance of that Villain Trendemirth and the Scorch both finding good targets. I think that might be a better option. It's a safer option because you can also just let it grow and Selkirk it next turn as well. So a lot of options for House of Cards here, maybe too much options. I mean, having so many Scorch effects might be a bit destructive in the end if HanaChan can play around it, because Villain Trendemirth is a 10 base strength. Selkirk is an 8 base strength. Those are pretty high units, and if you're damaging with machines as well and zapping with Thunders, all of a sudden you're looking at maybe a bit too much control in terms of Scorches.
I think House of Cards is okay depending on how he times it, because Villain Trendemirth no longer burns itself. So he doesn't have to worry about Villain Trendemirth killing Villain Trendemirth, so long as Villain Trendemirth isn't the biggest thing when he needs to play Scorch. And you see House of Cards opting to play that Hensel there onto the Ballista. 1 Ballista in deck, but that, you know, it turns a 3-point play into a 14-point play.
Looks like Selkirk will be hitting something different. That Longship will get toasted. Maybe the second Longship will get Selkirked, or just Torment Maged next turn.
I think at this point, to be honest, House of Cards is tormenting HanaChan with the amount of removal that he has. Great swords are just not welcome on this board, and House of Cards are saying, you got great swords? Well, they ain't so great at this house.
This is, you have the targets here, you have, you know, the ship, you can get your pick of whatever you want. You can kill the ship, you can kill the great sword, you can scorch the Longship. I mean, anything that's happening here, House of Cards is controlling it. I think he knows, yeah, the great sword's a better option because you can just Selkirk the ship next turn anyway, so no real threat there. And Jenga's going to get scorched as well once it comes down. Not many options here for HanaChan. Restore will be great. It's normally, you know, a fairly decent point swing, but I think the Villain Trendemirth combo with a Scorch is just going to be maybe a bit too much for HanaChan to handle.
I think that's 100% true. Like, House of Cards is in a really comfy position with all of this removal. He's also got that battering ram if he's even tempted to try and line anything up. He's got that little bit of grief. And the thing is, HanaChan is going to be playing some small targets, so he doesn't have to waste that. You know, he doesn't have to waste that hitting the 13 strength Longship. He can kind of spend that in a different way and just, you know, conserve as many points as he can.
This is a big play from HanaChan. Lots of points here. You can't really counter Restore. It's just a lot of points. That's how it works. But Jenga Fret can play around the valued game that the House of Cards might want to play with Battering Ram. It can ping for 1.
But this is where we see the value of that Mandrake that we saw in the previous round, bringing that light Longship down to 1 point. You might think, well, he's got 3 Longships, so he's never going to play the small one. But the thing is, House of Cards wasn't killing the Longships that he's been creating. He's just been whittling them down. And what that means is that HanaChan was forced into a situation where, you know, Pirate Captain into Corsair, into Longship is usually a huge play, but when your Longship's only worth 1 point, you know, that kind of takes the edge off it.
I think House of Cards playing Villain Trendemirth a turn early just to have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of Battering Ram to try and find the perfect option there. Do see a lead here for HanaChan, but there's going to be some big plays coming down from House of Cards. That's definitely one of them, denying the Herald Houndsnout combo.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of can tell at this point that HanaChan is all out of removal, so he's quite happy to do that and to kind of deny the combo, deny any options. We see Jenga in HanaChan's hand, so this was something that was a little bit scary, but because Wilfred, I think it is, died on House of Cards' turn.
You find a Freya. Freya isn't the greatest option. It's not a Renew. It's not. I mean, Hensel has been pulled out already, so Coral wouldn't be the greatest. Freya into a Greatsword isn't too bad. It's a fairly decent play. Not going to get much synergy going on, but there's a big point gap.
Yeah, the problem is that it was an 8-point Greatsword. You know, you have those Greatswords. The Resurrects are meant to be those huge plays, and it just isn't.
And here, Jenga Fret coming down for HanaChan, his final play. He's doing the math, but he knows it's going to be that ship is completely gone, and it's taking away points every single turn. And it's still in play.
You're coming with me.
He gets 1 extra point of value there. That's a very smart play from HanaChan. Trying to save 1 point there, not lining anything up, thankfully.
I don't think it matters though when you see the 16 burn and then the 14 burn.
But it's not enough.
It's not enough. So
Too many points.
Too many points.
And LpHanachan ends up taking it. So even with the Scorches, without lining them up, it's just not enough. And LpHanachan takes it 3-1. Like we said,
that was surprising.
if you have zaps, you can completely shut down ships. If you have Scorches, they're going to grill. You can't shut it down as well.
Yeah, that is true. And I think you were saying, he has too much control, and that actually is what kind of came back to him, is he had a lot of control, but the battering rams, they weren't getting their kind of chain reactions off. Battering rams, you're meant to be getting chain reactions.